And Jacinta Price says we got way too much immigration. Three-quarters of the party room says, oh, you can't say that. Well, that's what would have won you the last election. He had Trump's number. Anthony Albanese said Trump doesn't even have a phone. Albanese has diminished Australia's place in the world. The state of Victoria is the worst run jurisdiction on the planet right now. And the Victorian Liberal Party is so bad that they're going to lose the next election.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV Australia. I'm your host, online editor Alexandra Marshall. And today we have a fan favourite, James Allan. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alexandra. Nice to be here.
I am going to start with my favourite moment of the week so far, and that is Donald Trump, US President, leader of the free world, has unveiled his new wall of presidential fame near the West Wing. And essentially, it's a very long hallway with all the photographs of the US presidents. And then between two photographs of himself is a photo of an auto pen, which is meant to represent Joe Biden. What do you think?
He's actually funny. And he'll say things that people think, but what they wouldn't say. I think that's great. I mean, obviously, when the new person comes in, they'll put Biden up, but that is great. That is just great. The auto pen. It's just he fights back. I'm sure you're going to want to get onto his talk at the UN. What if just no one else would do that? And he said things that needed to be said.
But also, there's a more serious point here. He was making the observation that for quite a significant period of time, the US was led by an auto pen, a faceless bureaucracy of which nobody's really sure who was in charge.
Well, it was some combination of his wife, his chief of staff, and bureaucrats, and and people knew that in the Democratic Party, so they let it happen because for them anything was better than helping Donald Trump come back into office. They would have done anything. And that, what we need is actually some consequences. I haven't seen any consequences yet.
That's true. That's very true. My second favorite moment of the week is President of France, Macron, standing in a street in New York. He was frustrated because his convoy had been stopped in traffic because it was all brought to a standstill to allow Trump's motorcade to go through to the UN. So, of course, here is Macron. He calls up his bro, Trump, and he tells him he's stuck in traffic and can he help him? And Trump essentially told him to get out and walk, which he did. Did he deserve that one?
Well, two things. He's so hard to like, Macron. He's a product of their elite anarch schools in France, which make Yale and Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge look like they're open to the masses. So he's the product of an incredibly elite sort of upper end of French society, and he's just not a very likable guy. So when Trump tells him to walk, that's great. The other thing is, of course, he had Trump's number. Anthony Albanese said Trump doesn't even have a phone, and there's no way I can call him. And really, the problem is that Albanese has diminished Australia's place in the world immensely.
I think we all had secondhand embarrassment listening to that press conference with Albanese, where he denied a quote that he said during a debate and then said that if he had said what he didn't say, then he was joking.
Well, I didn't say that. I didn't. If I did, it's called a joke.
You almost feel like not allowing him to go to the White House meeting that's planned for October 20, don't you?
Yeah, here's what makes me sad. He is terrible, and he is miles ahead of the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party is so bad. They've got the Victorian disease. The state of Victoria is the worst run jurisdiction on the planet right now. And the Victorian Liberal Party is so bad that they're going to lose the next election.
Victoria needs a fresh start, and that fresh start will be a Victorian Liberals and Nationals government, which will have less waste, lower taxes and less crime here in our state. No, you're right. Hey, how mate?
It's just beyond belief. And that's what we're getting with the federal. I really think now we need a realignment. We need the half of the Liberal Party to leave and join up with the National Party and maybe chunks of the smaller right of center parties, because it's just not working right now. I call it the new Labour faction in the Liberal Party. They call themselves moderates, but they're just effectively, they should be in the Teal Party or the Labour Party. I can't vote for them. They're so bad. And they're the people who delivered Sussen Ley. They thought it was a good idea after the election to bring in a woman who'd been in Parliament for 26 years and really accomplished nothing.
I'm the leader and I'll make the call when the time comes. But what I said at the beginning of my leadership was I would consult, I would listen.
So we're in this horrible position where it's hard to see any way out.
The problem is, James, the Liberal Party faceless men who run the focus groups see your lack of vote as an indication that they must go further to the left in order to win your vote back to the Liberal Party. And for some reason, this ideology is persisting despite it being a pure fantasy. But the Liberals are in trouble, James, when the chief political conference in Australia, which is CPAC, the one that we've imported from America, the Trumpian let's all win kind of conservatism that's actually making ground over in the US. Well, Sussen Ley would not address that forum. That tells me they're in big trouble.
Well, she wouldn't address it because she sent Ted O'Brien and he got heckled. I mean, apparently, and I wasn't there, but apparently he gave the least rousing, the least convincing speech of the entire weekend. I'm getting that secondhand, but it doesn't surprise me if that were the case. And the heckling is clearly true. So they think, the problem is we so many people have left the Liberal Party as members that at the local level, it was always hard because the Liberal Party doesn't like pre-selections. We should be able to do what they do in the US and challenge incumbent sitting legislators. Challenge what we would take to be rhinos in the party. Let's go after them. We can leave a few in the inner cities, but there'd be a whole bunch of people who would lose out to someone else if we had a sort of more democratic way of picking our MPs within the Liberal Party. Remember, in Canada, there's 750,000 members of the Conservative Party. And here, I don't know, they won't release the numbers, but you hear anything from 20 to 30,000. Canada's only got 50% more people. So, we should have 500,000 if we're trying to keep up with Canada.
Here's my problem, James. If Sussen Ley can't walk into a CPAC conference of blue ribbon Liberals, because let's be honest, the audience of CPAC is traditional Conservatives. They cheered for Tony Abbott, they cheered for Matt Canavan, they cheered for Craig Kelly. That's what they like. And if she can't win an argument on any of her policies with that audience, which is receptive to conservative ideas, then she is not going to win an election with her election conservative pitch or her policies. That is very, very poor behavior from the leader of the Conservatives. She should be going in there and trying to convert them to her cause.
But here's what she gets told, and here's what Dutton got told that turned him into a bowl of jelly. They've got all these advisors, and why they listen to advisors who are getting them destroyed. Every single advisor should be fired. They aren't. But the advisors say to them, we have a voting system that's only used in 2 countries in the world, preferential voting. It is a sort of protection racket for the 2 main parties. And they will say to her, and they said to Dutton, and they said to Morrison, your base has nowhere else to go. We have compulsory voting and we have preferential voting. So when they have to go to the voting booth and they have to choose ultimately between you and Labour. And she's being told they won't pull the trigger for Labour. That's why back in 2015, after Abbott got axed, I said in the next election, everyone should vote Labour. And, people say to me, I didn't vote for the Libs. I put them 4th. And I said, well, where did you put Labour? 5th. I said, well, you voted for the Libs. You don't even understand your own voting system. And that's the problem. In a first past the post system, this Liberal Party would be destroyed because its core voters wouldn't vote for them. They rely on this sort of protection racket voting system. And so their advisors say to them, you're going to get their votes no matter what. And to some extent, that's true, but not enough. So they're losing 7, 8, 9%. So they're losing badly, but they're not getting obliterated. In Canada, once the Conservatives went from being the majority government under Mulroney in 88, so they had about 180 out of 270 seats. And in the next election, they went down to 2, the number over 1. They had 2 seats. That's what first past the post can do. You can really punish parties who aren't doing what their supporters want. We can't do that here. That's the problem.
There's also an internal struggle going on between the factions of the party, because the voters can only vote for what's being put forward. And For a very long time, the moderates have had absolute control of the factions, but we are seeing now Andrew Hastie, Jacinta Price, Matt Canavan, and Alex Antic are stepping out and forming a new coalition of sorts for the reimagined conservatism. Now, we're seeing pushback from nameless, faceless MPs who keep leaking quotes to various news outlets but aren't game enough to put their own names against their criticism. Do they have to have this internal fight first before the public can actually pick who they're going to run for? And so, I mean, I ran a poll. I don't know what you think about this, but Andrew Hastie came first when I offered him, Jacinta Price, and Alex Antic. They picked Hastie. But if you put clips up online, Jacinta Price is by far the more popular. Who do you think is the natural leader on this one?
So is Antic in the Senate?
Well, no, this is a dream team. This is an
I mean,
battle.
he would have to leave the
So if
Senate.
you could have, it's basically,
I know.
it's basically if you could have a leader, what style are you looking for? And people are saying online they prefer Jacinta Price, but when it comes to a physical poll, they're falling down on Hastie's side.
So the two things. Your first point about these sort of little areas where we're seeing improvement for the Conservatives. Well, it's Western Australia, it's Queensland, it's South Australia, it's Northern Territories. What we're not seeing is this happening in New South Wales and Victoria. And, they have the population. That's the problem. New South Wales presumably is better than Victoria. Victoria is like a black hole, a Death Star for anybody conservative. I mean, it's a low bar. You're running against the worst government in any jurisdiction in the world in Jacinta, Allan, and Victoria, and they're going to lose. So, it's hopeful, but again, I sort of would like to see the National Party leave the coalition, and then a big chunk of Liberal Party MPs moving over to them, and then running in every single constituency. That's what I'd like to see, because I've sort of given up on the Libs, but maybe I'm giving up too soon. In terms of leaders, I would go with Hastie too.
Hastie as well, yeah, but you don't hear very often the National Party being empowered because it is an existing party. Everyone's saying, "Oh, start new parties," but you're right, the Nationals are already there. However, I don't know if I see city seats voting for the National Party.
Well, no, what I mean is you'd see the coalition split, and then a big chunk of Liberal Conservative MPs would go, and they would form with National and they would create a new party. Call it, I don't care what you call it, the Menzies party, whatever the hell you want to call it, doesn't matter. But you'd at least have an existing sort of infrastructure. I mean, it's quite remarkable what Menzies did after the Second World War, because with the preferential voting system, it is so hard to get a new party up and running. And he pulled that off. But he did it by combining existing parties, and that's what we'd have to do again. And these sort of new labor types in the Liberal Party, they have no constituency. They're effectively like cuckoos who have come in and taken over the machinery of what is meant to be a right of center party, and they've taken it over for their own ends. But people don't. There's just not enough of a voting base for them. When Morrison looked like he actually had some conservative views and said no to net zero, they won. But then, of course, he listened to all the wokesters, all the new labor types, and he signed us up to net zero without telling anybody he was a complete and total authoritarian during COVID. And Dutton, I don't know what happened to him. He had a chance to run on the two issues that would have won, massively slashing back on immigration intake and getting out of net zero. And even if he'd lost running on those two, he could have held his head up high. I mean, he must be embarrassed to go out of the House. He ran on nothing. I'm going to raise the price. I'm going to lower the price of gas for 8 months or whatever it was. I mean, it's ridiculous. And they just basically signed up to the whole labor agenda. I don't know why these people go into politics. I mean, is it just a chauffeur-driven car? Presumably, you want to go in and try to make Australia better. And that means if you lose, but you stand for something. And right now, you look at the coterie of people in the coalition, and they're just so worthless. I mean, there are exceptions, but by and large, and they look after themselves. They make it hard for pre-selections to kick them out. They need to get a new leader who just basically says, I'm not putting any of you in the shadow cabinet. None of this being nice. And we're going to open up pre-selections for everyone. so that the local constituencies can deselect anybody they want. That would be great. People would start joining the party again.
I have a feeling a lot of them run because they want the word honourable before their name, more than anything, for the rest of their lives. I want to return to the UN because it was such a good time to watch this whole show go down. It was more. I haven't been this entertained since that Golden Globes when that comedian, what was his name?
It's the last time. Who cares?
Ricky Gervais.
Ricky Gervais took the mic and just handed Hollywood their asses. That was my favorite moment. Anyway, so we had Donald Trump getting to the escalators at the UN, and of course they stop immediately. And then he gets to the stage and the teleprompter stops working. And so, which is never a good idea to do that to Trump. If you do it to Biden, you get no speech. If you do it to Trump, he tells you whatever he wants because he's now got an open mic and no script.
All I got from the United Nations was an escalator that on the way up stopped right in the middle. If the First Lady wasn't in great shape, she would have fallen, but she's in great shape. And then a teleprompter that didn't work. These are the two things I got from the United Nations, a bad escalator and a bad teleprompter. Thank you very much.
And boy, did he hand it to the UN. Was that a perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with the UN, that it just doesn't work?
Well, firstly, Megyn Kelly said the greatest thing that happened that day was that when the escalator stopped, Trump's First Lady wife walked up the stairs, the escalators, in 4-inch heels. And she said, according to her, this was the greatest event. No, every woman knows that's, she just plowed on up in 4-inch heels. I don't know how hard that is, but probably,
very, very hard. Very hard.
Probably half the Liberal Party room knows. And secondly, Trump was great. I mean, he talked about mass immigration in Europe, and he's right, and no one will say it. They're letting in people who don't share any core values with us. And Trump said, you're just changing these countries, and he's right. And it doesn't matter. People say it's not polite, it's racist, it's not. I mean, we want to live in a Western liberal democracy. So he talked about that. And then he went after Western European countries for their insane energy policies. And he said the two of them together are going to bankrupt you and change you forever. This is completely true. Why is Australia the most ardent net zero types when the US is completely out? China lies about it, but they're effectively completely out. India's out. Russia's out. And what we do makes no difference at all, but we're impoverishing ourselves. And we have no manufacturing that's, viable anymore. And worse than that, we send our, raw materials offshore where they are used to pump out all sorts of carbon dioxide. So we're not even actually saving the planet. We're just able to say, well, Australia's not burning this. We just ship it overseas and they're burning it over there. I mean, the people who think this is a morally good idea, you can't even understand their argument. It seems to boil down to something like, we'll be a moral beacon for Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi, and they will all of a sudden change. Or even the Western Europeans are coming onto this is a crazy train. So even there, they talk the game now, but they're not really implementing it. I was just in Canada, and Mark Carney, the left-wing prime minister who took over from Justin Trudeau, he is even saying now we're going to have another look at net zero. So we are in a world now where the Liberal Party of Australia is to the left of Mark Carney, and they haven't got rid of Sussen Ley yet. I never know how to say her first name. She's the numerologist, the two S's. Do you go Susan? So Susan, I don't know. You can tell me how you pronounce her name. At any rate, it was a great speech by Trump. He annoyed everybody. Fantastic. People don't realize the Americans pay 28 to 30% of the UN budget. And not many people remember that Ronald Reagan cut a lot of US funding to the UN for a bunch of years and basically just took all their money away for like a big chunk of their money. I'd do that if I were Trump. I'd just say, you're useless. And every country that signed up to recognize Palestine has actually made the world worse.
Well, Donald Trump also hurt Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, his
Isn't that
feelings quite badly. And I remember there was a clip shortly after where the journalist found Sadiq Khan sitting on public transport, clearly a stunt. I doubt very much Sadiq Khan takes public transport on the regular. And he was basically glowering at the camera because the emotional harm transferred by a few cruel words by Trump.
That means I seem to be living rent-free inside Donald Trump's head.
And what's great about Trump that he doesn't get enough credit for is he knows how to dismantle a person's character in politics. I remember they did it with that Bloomberg box when he stood on a box during the debate. That was it for him.
You know, now he wants a box for the debates to stand on. Okay, it's okay. There's nothing wrong. You could be short.
James, our politicians are completely talentless. They have no ability to vocalize their opinions, argue their policies, or even tell the public why they should vote for them. They are basically like those Democrat uni students who used to go up to Charlie Kirk with what they thought were gotchas and have their worldview completely dismantled in a few minutes. If our politicians were to sit down and try to have a debate with Charlie Kirk, they would be embarrassed within about 5 seconds. But I want to ask you
too, but when Jacinta Price says we got way too much immigration, 3/4 of the party room says, "Oh, you can't say that." Well, that's what would have won you the last election. They went to the election with, we're going to cut immigration by 10%. This is crazy. You are running the world's biggest per capita immigration intake, and that was under the coalition. I mean, what really makes it bad is everything Labour's doing was being done by the coalition. This is why the Conservative Party in Britain is effectively, they're at 15% in the polls, Labour's at 16%, and the Reform's at 34, 35%. Well, I mean, barely will he come in time. But here's what the thing is: at least there's hope in Britain, because at least you can look and say, well, odds are very high that Reform's going to win, and we'll start to roll back the judicial activism and the sort of mass. And he'll park the Royal Navy in the English Channel. But here you look in Australia, and the entire Anglosphere, there's the least amount of hope. There is nothing that gives you hope because the Liberal Party is completely broken. And how can the Conservatives in the party room be sitting there and thinking, it's too early to take Sussen Ley out? You know what they're really thinking? We're too afraid because she's a woman. And, we have to give her, as a woman, it's not going to look good if we don't give her, I don't know, a year and a half. I don't say this lightly. She's worse than Malcolm Turnbull.
That's cruel. That's very cruel, James. I want to finish with your thoughts here. We do know, all things, if they go to plan, Anthony Albanese will have his moment in the sunshine with Donald Trump in the White House. That's been the invitation that's offered to him. I have a feeling he's going to brandish his Medicare card.
With just their Medicare card.
And he's probably going to mention that he's a housing commission boy. That aside, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to be good for Australia, or is this a very, very risky scenario in which Albanese could upset the president, like we saw with Zelensky not wearing a suit? I don't know. I'm a bit worried.
Well, again, it depends whether you take a long-term or a short-term view. Trying to predict what Trump's going to do is impossible. I have no idea what Trump's going to do. If he catches him on the wrong day, Trump will just insult him for 20 minutes. You might be worried about that, but I think I'd enjoy it, to be totally honest. He deserves it. I'd like to see him get a strip torn off him for recognizing Palestine. What would be the worst outcome from Australia is if Trump gets so annoyed he just ups the tariffs. Right now we have the lowest tariffs in the world, partly because we don't run a deficit with the Americans. I think we're one of the few countries that don't. So we're at 10%. And did you notice that all of these former fantastic credentialed economists who said that tariffs would lead to a massive inflation in the U.S., they've all been proven wrong. Right now, even the Fed in the U.S. is saying, well, we're not seeing the inflation that the models predicted. And so the U.S. has better inflation than we do, I think, right now. And their economy is booming, and ours is, I don't know what the unemployment rate there is in Victoria, but it's bad.
That's because Trump doesn't play games. The tariffs did exactly what he said they would do. They would restructure the trade agreements with the rest of the world. That's
and bringing
what they were
money. He sees it as a revenue raiser.
But that's exactly what they were designed to do. And he had the bargaining chip of, well, Europe wants help with Russia, therefore play nicely with your trade or no help with Russia. And of course, they all eventually came to the table. But what Trump is doing is he gives investors confidence. He said, this is the America that we're going to have. You can build this company here. You can build this energy company. We are going to put these rules in place and they will be the rules. Whereas in Australia, we've got Jim Chalmers of kind of capitalism. And he keeps changing the tax rates, changing the rules and regulations, and nobody knows if you can set up a business, if you can open a mine, if you can sell a product, and if you can pay your staff, or if there's even going to be electricity to turn the lights on. You can't run a country like that, James.
No. Well, two things. I think the Europeans were running way more restraints of trade. It wasn't just tariffs, it was their anti-dumping provisions. Trading with the EU, they had way more constraints on American. They would pretend that you couldn't bring in American beef because they were, it was genetically modified in the plants. So there were way more blocks on American goods coming into the EU than EU goods coming into the US. And Trump just knew that. He knew they'd have to cave in. The problem with Australia, and I love living here, but we have basically the highest minimum wage. When I got here in 2005, we had the lowest energy prices in the democratic world. Now, if we're not the highest, we're in the top 3 democratic countries. So we have incredibly high energy prices. We have incredibly high minimum wages. We have a sclerotic labor relations regime. No other country in the world runs a labor relations regime where sort of pseudo bureaucrat judge type people tell you what you have to pay, and they issue these 1,400 page awards that nobody can live up to. The ABC breaches it, Coles and Woolworth breaches it. Even France, which is one of the most left-wing democratic countries going, they don't do this. The last country that had it is New Zealand. They got rid of it in the 1980s. It's a labor relation regime that goes back to the early 1900s. It doesn't work. So we have that. We have the high energy costs. We have ridiculous sort of incentives to work from home. Nobody believes that you're as productive when you work from home as you are in the office. I know there are exceptions. There's, people who are writing novels who work at home, and a few people have the drive and the willpower like you. But as a generalized claim, there's just absolutely no way that working from home does anything other than lower, because all of a sudden you're picking up the kids and you're baking and you're whatever, and you didn't used to be able to do that. It's also destroying inner city sort of cafes and restaurants. It's bad across the board. For young people, it's particularly bad because one of the most important things when you start in a new job is basically socializing with more senior people and learning how the game works and making contacts. And that's, so we've destroyed young people's lives with the insane lockdown thuggery. And now we're continuing to destroy their lives. They don't realize it by letting them work from home. And so why would you hire people in this country? You're going to be locked into these rules that are so constraining.
Well, we're almost out of time, James, but let me finish with a fun one. I've been asking people this question all week. How long do you think Sussen Ley is going to survive in the leadership? Do you think she'll make it to the end of the week, the end of the year, next election?
Okay, so my wish is that she made it to the end of today. But if I had to guess, what is it now? It's the end of September. I'll go for Remembrance Day, November 11th.
I should start handing out prizes for the person who is closest to the actual answer.
You get a free year subscription to the
Spectator prize for guessing the political lifespan of Sussen Ley.
James, November 11th.
James, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Thanks, Alexander. Great to be here.